Welcome, everybody. This week's Griscom stream, special Friday afternoon stream. Hope you're doing good wherever you're at. I'm doing pretty nice, man. I've been having some fun at South by so far, as long as I can limit the amount of freaks I have to see. The music's been great so far. But we're not here to talk about that. I'm really stoked to have a guest on this Griscom stream. And as y'all know, these are a little bit more interactive. So feel free to jump in the chat with any questions or comments that y'all have about what we're talking about. But without further ado, really stoked to be joined. We don't typically have guests on these, so I'm really happy that you did it. I'm joined by Aaron Thorpe. Aaron, thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Of course, David. I remember talking to you and Matt about hauntology and about lost futures and whatnot on y'all's pod. So it's been a long time coming, man. I'm happy to talk to you again.
Yeah, man. And, y'all should already know Aaron, famous from many different Twitter accounts, which is a pretty, that's a high posting level to, go by many names.
I
But
think
you also
like
know the,
I think like seven, 8 accounts, man. I'm diseased, man. I'm addicted to Twitter. I think most normal people, like maybe after the third or fourth time, they would have been like, "Nah, I'm good," but I had to keep going. So.
well, you're delivering, man. I mean, I appreciate I appreciate all the different forms we have there. And, just remind folks, if, you're not already following Aaron, which you should, you can listen to him on the Trillbillies, Everybody Loves Communism, and also on Struggle Sesh as well. But yeah, man, I mean, I really not to talk about Twitter, but I really appreciate, your account. One, the stuff that you say, but also the art and the kind of spirit that you're bringing to that world, because I think it really needs it.
Yeah.
And I mean, maybe to set us up, and we could take this whichever way we want. But I've been thinking a lot. We had Gene Bajlan on the program recently, and he said something that I thought was very thought provoking about the left, and he called the left reactionary. And what he meant by that, just to be clear, is he meant that more in the traditional sense, is it's a past glory, right? It's backwards looking. And he mentioned in the US, that's why there's a lot of fetishization of FDR, for example, or the labor struggles of the early 20th century. And it's obviously provocative, but I feel that he's getting at some truth that I find a lot of times on the left, it's a very defensive posture, right? It's things are bad, and what we need to sort of do is try to collectively wrap ourselves around whatever good things we have and defend them.
We need to wrap ourselves in our little snuggy comfort blanket, you know what I mean? Collectively, the comrade blanket,
Yeah. And which for me it's just you look at the tradition of the left, you look at some of the early Bolshevik stuff. There always was this idea, it's the better days are ahead, and we're building that right now. It's this kind of mission. And I've always found that to be something that I'm very attracted with socialism. But I mean, before we get into maybe talking about the contemporary left, I think this is a really important bit to get at and sort of reclaim. And I was just curious, you like sci-fi, you like these kind of futuristic ideas and imaginings, maybe utopias. Could you just give people a sense of where that comes from in your life, and maybe how it informs your politics a bit?
Yeah. I just want to, first I want to say that, the left is very mired in this defeatism. I can't remember the article right now, but my friend Sam Adler-Bell, people might know his podcast, Know Your Enemy, that he does with Matt Sitman, wrote a really great article about how the left is obsessed sort of with defeat, and it's almost like we lost because we were too good, and I think in this era of futurelessness, especially my generation, I would say everybody, but anyone who's born in the 1980s to the early 2000s, right? Even up until now, but I'm talking about people who are millennials and Zoomers. I think that there's a lot of nostalgia, not just on the socialist side for FDR, and the Bernie campaign was sort of channeling that sort of energy, right? As if there was always socialism in America, right? People who like to kind of play around with a little bit of Americana, right? And socialism, they like to say that, right? But also just writ large, you see it in this obsession with the 70s and the 80s, right? I was thinking about the 70s show and how that when that came out in the 90s, the 70s were as far away from the 90s as the 90s are from now, right? So the 90s
Mhm.
show is out now, but it doesn't feel like that, you know? And like,
Mhm.
I think as Mark Fisher said, it's like, time has sped up, but culture has slowed, and
Mhm.
I think a lot of that is because of, again, what Mark Fisher says, and in Margaret Thatcher's own words, there is no alternative, right? In
Mhm.
capitalist realism, I mean, it's not just climate change, but this climate change is the ambient background noise, and that's something we can talk about a bit because um, I think a lot about the futurelessness has to deal with that.
I
But
think
just
so too,
in terms
yeah.
of the left can't even. I'm not saying that the left can't imagine a better world, but I think what you said about us trying to sort of focus on the present right now and what we are doing and how we're dealing with these crises instead of hearkening back to not a retro futuristic vision of the future, but truly, I mean,
Mhm.
I love retro soft art from the Soviet Union, especially, right? If
Mhm.
anybody follows me, they know that because it really does feel like this unbridled, unbounded vision of the future that there were problematic and there were questions, of course, but I guess you could say that it didn't seem dependent upon this relentless expansion and growth, right? So
Mhm.
I don't know. I guess to answer your question, I don't know. I guess like the to kind of set up, I think the left now, like everyone else, is dealing with futurelessness and also with like this obsession with the past, like everyone is
Mhm.
relitigating on Twitter, like, these battles and these interscene left battles that happened 100 years ago, whose people's names who I do not fucking know, you know what I mean? And most people don't. But I mean, that's kind of what you do when you're in a position of defeat, right? So
Mhm. No, I mean,
I don't yeah, yeah.
there's a lot of it that's imaginary, right? In the sense of like, people have a lot of correctly, I think, have like a lot of like political energy to not have like a good scientific term to it, right? You're paying attention to what's happening. It's fucked up. I want to do something about it. But a lot of people feel like the space between like their ability to enact change or to participate in politics is limited, right?
Yeah.
So you find places that you can sort of experience, activity on some level. And like, yeah, like having fights about like Hold'em online with
Yeah.
people like is like it like seems to take up a tremendous amount of space. And like, look, I'm somebody, and like on this podcast too, like I think history is really important. Like I'm
Mhm.
somebody who does a lot of work, looking, for example, at like the early socialist movements in this country. But like the point there is not for us to sort of dress up as them again and like recreate
Yeah.
it, like
Yeah.
a bad act of it. But rather to say like this was people reacting to what they had at that time, and we're trying to think creatively about how to do things that seemed really difficult to do then, and they did a lot. So like, what are you seeing around you right now that we could start to mobilize on, and build from? But like, I mean, maybe like to hold like the future center for just a
Mhm.
couple more minutes. Like, I don't know, like if you remember, like it's funny talking. Like 2017 feels like years, like
Dude, that was like
lifetimes.
that was like almost a decade ago at this point, like nearing that. I was thinking about that the other day. Time is fucking weird.
No, it certainly is. But like, it's funny to me how like there was a moment where there were these, and like maybe you could call them utopian, right? And I disagreed with some aspects of them, but there were things like full automated luxury communism, like that was like
Mhm.
a buzzword on the left.
Yeah.
And like now I find a lot of like the visions of the future that we get from the left to be very pessimistic.
Yeah.
Like instead of saying like we're going to utilize technology, we're going to try to liberate people from work, we're going to try to build systems that not only meet like our base level but like expand upon that so we can all
Mhm.
live like very fulfilled lives. Like I don't see those ideas as popular, as holding as much sway as they might have like
Yeah.
6 or 7 years ago. And I think that's to our detriment. Like I think it's negative, that like, because like a lot of socialists, they talk about, like Mark Fisher's like the great chronicler of like
Mhm.
politics and like depression, right?
Mhm.
But one thing I always say is that, like, yes, it's like, things are bad and like you should feel upset about them and all that. But like for me, socialism has always been a very optimistic philosophy
Yeah.
that says like out of all of this shit,
Yeah.
like
It's
something better can come.
and it's forward thinking, right? You know
Hmm.
what thought was funny. People should read this book. I Want to Believe, by from Andy from the Antifada, right? He wrote
Hmm.
this book on Posidism, and I think during 2016, 2017, the Bernie campaign, you saw this. I don't even want to call it a resurgence because had never heard of Posadism before, and people don't
Hmm.
know. Jay Posadas was an Argentinian Trotskyist, and it's a subsect of Trotskyism, which he believes that a nuclear apocalypse, right,
Mhm.
is the catalyst to worldwide revolution, and then we'll be visited by aliens, because if aliens exist, they have to already be post scarcity, right? Which there's some merit to that argument, right? Um,
Mhm.
and then dolphins. My fucking favorite part of it is that dolphins will we have a telepathic link with dolphins, and they'll help us. They'll be our comrade friends. But apocalypse, right? It's an apocalyptic accelerationist
Mhm.
sort of viewpoint in its seriousness, but also like in its it's in its irony. And I think that's because you know when Trump, I was thinking about when Trump got elected, and how, and people could agree disagree with this, but how terrible he was, but how funny it was. And I think that people had to kind of find that humor if things were going to be so terrible. And I don't know, I think maybe, I don't want to be like, oh, we need some new sincerity. David Foster Wallace was a big proponent of that. I don't know how much I believe in it,
Mhm.
but I do think that coupled with futurelessness is this kind of biting, sardonic, like, irony and sarcasm that's probably just, characteristic of like late capitalism, neoliberalism itself. But I don't think that's doing us any favors either, to be honest. Yeah.
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, yeah, you could definitely see like where it comes from. And look, I totally agree. I mean, Trump's very funny. We play Trump on the show all the time. Still, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
if I talk about
we're
him any
like we don't
longer, I
even
will
get
start
Trump.
quoting him.
Like,
Like
yeah,
literally, he's a funny fucking guy, right? Sorry, he is.
no, we have to like go through the weeds of like Truth Social to get the good stuff. Still, like we're like
Yes.
actively like
Yeah, yeah.
searching it out now, right?
It's like top of the bottom shelf. It's not good quality Trump anymore. Yeah.
But like, I think that like on the left, like I think climate change like definitely plays a big role in this kind of sense of futurelessness, right? Like if it wasn't already bad before, I mean, like the left's been talking about climate for a while. But
Mhm.
I think that like the kind of fever pitch, the climate emergency language, like that kind of feeling is like there might not be like a civilization like we understand it in like 30 years.
Yeah.
Um, and some of that's like attached to like the reality. I think some of that too is just like there are people who are willing to embrace like the end times, right? Like
Yeah.
every generation has always thought that they're, this is it kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Um,
That's true.
but and it's again, I'm not saying that like climate change isn't real, and like we're not in like a really difficult situation, but like there's a part of that I think that too is just like your ability and willingness to accept that. I think some folks are just sort of primed for it,
Yeah.
and I think it gets worse. If like you're saying like the early 2000s are the 90s, the early 2000s are the kind of the end of history, the
Mhm.
supremacy of like neoliberalism, no other alternative. This is like the world as it is. Then climate change does sort of make it say that like, okay, well now you don't even get to fight for socialism. Now you actually just have to fight for like the 2001 like
Yeah,
world.
exactly.
You know what I
You
mean?
have to fight to now just, I mean, it is barbarism, but we're not even like, I think it's something that, and it is political, but I do think it in people's minds, it almost transcends politics. It's this almost
Hmm.
existential looming dread and terror. And I mean, I don't know. I think, remember when the kids threw the soup on the Van Gogh, and
Hmm.
painting in the museum, and people were like all up in arms and whatnot. Um and I was of two minds. I think like, yeah, like that actually that group, that activist group, they do like more direct action shit, right? Than just like throw
Hmm.
soup at paint. But I was just thinking about like, the fact that like that they even have to do this. And
Oh
that
yes.
like we're at this position where awareness, right, of climate change, everyone is mired in awareness, and it's like, dog, what point do we go beyond awareness when
Uh,
ExxonMobil has known for almost like 100 years, right? And I think, and I don't mean to like, hopefully we can, towards the end talk about like, some positive visions of the future,
yeah.
but to talk about like the future in a way that why I think it stresses people out now is because it seems like we have all the answers, but the political
Hmm.
will and the solutions aren't there. And
Hmm.
we ourselves, I think, especially in the United States, the way that the left has just been decimated, right? Especially
Hmm.
think about like, in terms of like, following the black radical tradition or following, radical black organizing. I mean, these guys are dead in jail, you know?
Hmm.
And that is something that's just like, you find throughout the left. And when you look at, I guess when people get upset at those kids or they get frustrated, and it's like, well, I mean, what leaders do they have? What leaders do we have, right? Not to say that this movement needs to be led by people, but I'm talking about examples, right? They feel
Hmm.
so far in the past that it makes sense to me why we're still obsessed with them.
No, I mean, I think that's a great point. I mean, like on that, like we covered that a little bit, just because it's like I wasn't too like motivated or mobilized by that, because I do think it's just awareness, and at a certain point, it's just awareness forever, right?
Yeah.
It's awareness all the way down, and it's been awareness since the '70s, right? And as you were just saying, it's not really like a grandmother and her like grandkids who are going to see paintings at the museum who are preventing us from doing something about it. It's like this entire political system is hostile. I mean, like, look, I mean, we all had to go vote in the most important election of our life in 2020 to save the planet. And now Biden
Yeah.
is kicking Trump's ass and expanding the fossil fuel industry in the country, right? Like, without some kind of real political alternative, like I understand why people get really cynical. And I think that it's like important for us not to fall. I mean, like, I don't know if you're familiar with Leo Panich,
Mm.
but Leo Panich is like one of my favorite social thinkers. He passed away just a couple of years back, but he has this really excellent line on climate change, I think, and politics. Right, is that like we can never deny ourselves like the future. And what he's saying there is he's not denying like climate change. Like, even if the reality is we have 15 years or whatever, right?
Mm.
We have to be able to think 20, 30, 40, 50 years in terms of like building movements to be successful. Because
Yeah.
when we foreclose that, we're sort of left without any alternatives, right? Because like to build up a movement, it takes a long time. And like this isn't just like some like defeatist, like late 20th century 21st century thing. Like, this is Marx's arguments in like the 1800s. Like, this is
Yeah.
going to take 40, 50 years to be able to build like a working class party that's able to take power, right? Like,
Absolutely.
Marx is saying that in like in 18 in the 1840s, 1850s. And it's the same reality, unfortunately. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't change things quickly and we can't mobilize quickly, but we have to have that long vision of what we're doing. And I think what like climate change and like the feeling that like things aren't going to get better and apocalypse is coming, if it's nuclear or if it's nuclear weapons or if it's climate change, it sort of forecloses not just like what you and I would want, which is like a
Mm.
better future, right? It
Mm.
forecloses like even the opportunity um to like act in like the worst case scenario, because the imagining is
There's
that
no
it's
more.
over.
Yeah, like there's no more time left, right? As if there's no more time left. And you know what? You're so right, man. Like I do think about like how not that I'm praising the right wing, but when you look at, decision like the Roe v. Wade decision, right, that
Hmm.
happened last year, and you look at the projects, I mean, whether it's the Trans Panic Now or the CRT stuff, right, in public schools, you see that this has been building, right, for decades, right? This is not something this has been building like, post Civil Rights Act, right? This is something that's been building for a long time. And, it's not surprising to you and I, right? When, because
Hmm.
Democrats are often, not often, in cahoots, 100% of the time with this shit. But it's not surprising to you or I, but it's surprising to other people. Like, why didn't they do something, And it's because the I'm sad to say it, but the right, I don't want to say that that I think the left has a vision. I don't know if I'm not sure what vision of. I think the left has a vision of the future. I just think it's a little bit fractured right now. But liberals, right?
Hmm.
I really
Hmm.
don't think liberals, and I'm saying when I'm saying liberals, I'm talking about the Democratic Party. I don't really
Hmm.
think they have a vision of the future besides maintaining.
Hmm.
And I think the right has a terrifying vision of the future that they are currently implementing right now, and that's something that terrifies me, right? Because that means that not just the left, I'm talking about working class people, just regular ass people, have to rely on this party that really can't really is myopic, and is
Hmm.
short sighted. Yeah.
I'm just going to read this really quick
Yeah.
from Strom, put in stronger language than I'd say it. But Strom says that sort of desecration is self-indulgent propaganda of the D tantrums like those are counter-revolutionary. I mean, I think that like I don't I think that like I would agree more with Aaron that like these are people sort of not feeling like they have the tools to do what it needs to be done. And like I think that it's not surprising that people sometimes do actions like that. Like, I'm not somebody who like my heart breaks about something hit some tomato soup hitting glass. Right, that is the paintings and stuff are safe. But I do think that like it's more of a return to like protest as politics, right? And I think we need to return like to doing politics. That was the exciting thing of the Bernie movement, of like Syriza, of Corbyn, not that those didn't all sort of implode upon themselves, but the exciting thing is that where people are thinking about politics as like an avenue for change. And just saying what you're talking about, like the Democratic Party, like one thing that I write a lot about is Texas,
Mm,
because I find it to be a really I mean, one, it's, I love it and it's where I'm from, but like it's also a really fascinating state because it sort of goes up against, I think, the liberal vision of the future, right? So like the Democratic Party here is always like, well, once Texas stops, once the demographics in Texas change, right,
mhm,
then like the votes will change. And Texas is a minority majority state. And it's been pretty close up to that for a long time, but it flipped recently. The idea is basically the Democratic Party is going to win, because there'll be larger populations of like Black and Hispanic voters that are going to vote for the
mhm,
Democratic Party. But you know what the really damning thing about that strategy is?
mm.
Well, now it's happened, and instead of seeing expansion of big wins for Robert O'Rourke, or Beto as his maid called him,
Robert. I
um,
can't believe this guy's name is actually every time I hear Beto, I'm like, this guy's name is Robert, man.
um, like the Republicans are winning votes in
Yeah.
the South Texas. They're winning votes in the Black community, right? And I think more importantly than not, they're losing voters. Like people are falling out of the political, out of politics altogether. And look, I don't think that the project of the left needs to be to revive and like return the Democratic Party some
Yeah.
like former glory. I think that'd be a waste. I would feel
Yeah.
disappointed in my life if that's like what we achieved.
That would set us
Um,
back.
I think so. But when you talk to like non-voters in the state, and there's a really great piece in Texas Monthly where they went and they interviewed people, and you know what people said? It's like, I showed up 2008, 2012 for Obama, and then things seemed to get worse, right,
Yeah.
and not better. And I felt like I had been used. And then they asked them like, what do you support? Well, I support Medicare for all. I support bank regulations, all these kind of things that should be our bread and butter. But the problem that we have sometimes on our side is that like, well, one, the Democratic Party's not running on that, right? So we want them to
Yeah.
run on that. But like, even if they are running on it, right? And we saw this with Bernie. I mean, Bernie mobilized a lot of people, but it didn't hit that critical mass it needed to hit. And it's because a
Mm.
lot of people are like, I like Medicare for all, I like a Green New Deal, I like this kind of thing. This ain't gonna happen. So
Yeah.
why go and waste my time, and wait in line to vote or do any of this kind of stuff if it's not going to, improve my life? I don't believe that you guys are capable of doing this. And like,
Mm.
I think so much on our side, it's like, well, what if we had the right messaging? Or
Yeah.
what if we had like the best argument? Or we're going to get the best media strategy out there. And it's great that we
Mm.
have independent media. Don't get me wrong. I
Yeah.
participate in it.
Yeah. I mean, me
Um,
too. Yeah.
yeah. But like the point is like I think we're almost like we're not even in the convincing stage on these kind of things. We're like we need to have the right argument. Like you actually have to show people that you have the capacity that like being a part of these movements is going to improve your life. Versus
Absolutely.
just like I'm going to take a stand, right? And there's always going to be people who are going to be willing to take a stand, like symbolically. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like to say,
Yeah.
like I say no to this thing, and that's
Yeah.
great. I love those people. Those people, do amazing things. They've
Mm.
changed the world. But that's not going to be enough because what we need is like a real sustained movement, not just of like voluntarist,
Yeah.
activity to like wake people up, which I think is a
Agreed.
real fetish on the left.
Agreed, agreed. You know what? I'm right now. Two things. I think during the pandemic, right, where the material conditions were worsening and the contradictions were ever widening, where everybody could see them, right, where people were being called essential workers and then being told, like, maybe little under a year later that now they had to go back to work, right?
Hmm.
I think that the wave of unionization, right, and the wave of labor action that you saw during, and still now, right, is something that's like incredibly heartening. But also too recently in Atlanta, the Defend the Forest Cop City, where the Atlanta Police
Hmm.
Department or the Atlanta Police Foundation is raising, I think it's what is it? The 300 acres, I think, $90 million city complex that they're going to build a mock
Hmm.
city so that they can train there. And I went out for the first time last week with my co-host Jamie and Jamie Peck of Everybody Loves Communism, and seeing, I think this is important to think about. When I think about the future, I think about Cop City, right? Because what are
Hmm.
they trying to do, right? They're building this mock city so that they can train in, because I'm assuming that they envision urban unrest, right? Again, as these
Hmm.
material conditions worsen, right? And they are preparing for the future because this is the only thing that the state can do, right? I don't think that the liberal bourgeois democratic state can do anything positive like a New Deal. People can disagree, but I don't think we're going to see that again in our lifetime, right? There needs to be something radical, right? But seeing the coalition building, right? Seeing the
Mhm.
black clergy, right? Seeing the white anarchists or the ones defending the forest, right? This is where Tortuguita was killed, right?
Mhm.
Seeing like the young HBCU and black student movements come through, right? Seeing the Jewish groups come through. I mean, like, when I think positively about the future, and I know it might sound paradoxical for some people, but I do think about the South, right? Because
Oh,
in this
totally.
in this condition, right, in this social condition where, like, I mean, black and white people were not even, I mean, not even just discouraged, but punished, right? Black
Mhm.
people for fraternizing with each other, right? And white people were incentivized not to do so. And I think about the Communist Party coming down to Alabama and trying to organize black sharecroppers. I mean, like, that's where the future lies, right? Like, the future truly, I think about the Spock quote, right? Infinite
Mhm.
diversity and infinite combinations, I think it is, right? You
Mm.
know,
Mhm.
and how much of that is like just necessary for our future. And to kind of go back to the right, what is the right doing? They're closing ranks, right? Right. At
Mhm.
this point now, they're not even talking about laws anymore. They're calling for genocide. I mean, they already were doing that, but
Mhm.
explicitly so, right? I mean, the only response that the left has to, I mean, I don't want to say the only response. I don't know what we're supposed to do. I don't know how we do it, but it has to be pluralistic, right? It has to be the
Yeah.
kind of organizing and the kind of movement that I'm seeing in a city, a black city like Atlanta right now,